Our world is lost in unnecessary fear and hurt. Our systems seem scientifically engineered to make you small, powerless, and always waiting for the next great leader who will fix the problems around us. Worse, we're witnessing neighbor versus neighbor while warfare breaks out around our family tables. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. A libertarian president? Well, Javier Milei of Argentina has won that title with a strong electoral victory that overcame a political dynasty called the Justicialist Party. Argentinians were looking for an economic savior, and Milei was very direct about the scapegoat, who to blame for the nation's hyperinflation. He proposed some radical solutions to help Argentinians flourish, and the voters agreed with him. Some of his proposals are music to the libertarian's ear, but some of his social views, not so libertarian, and his campaign was far less than gracious. Obviously, this watershed moment is ripe for the ready, willing, and eager comments of career libertarians. And fortunately, Gracearchy is home to the leader of the grace-based new libertarian movement, Jim Babka.
Oh, wow. Oh, I hope I can live up to that. And congratulations on saying Justicialist.
Oh, that took me a few tries. You're going to have to explain that for listeners, of course.
We will get to that. Yes, we'll get to it.
So, extreme right-wing libertarianism? My head is spinning, man.
Yeah, so you obviously read the headlines, right?
I read the headlines. Yeah, they're trying to make this one work.
I have no idea what the heck that means.
It's a political thirst trap.
Yeah, libertarians have this funny joke they like to tell that they want to take over the world just so they can leave you alone.
Right.
Right? Whereas, anybody that's extreme right wing or extreme left wing, they're not interested in leaving anybody alone. Quite the contrary. I mean, the whole they're interested in the delicious tears of their enemies, right?
Right.
Yeah. So there is no such thing as a extreme right wing libertarian. It's word salad.
Yeah, totally.
And it's designed to demonize. It's not designed to be gracious. It's designed to demonize.
Scapegoat. They're setting it up right now.
Yeah.
Has this guy got a chance? I mean, or maybe we better start back. Is he really a libertarian?
Well, I think we should dissect that into some detail today. And I think the place to start is to say, what is a libertarian? And this is a topic, obviously, as the co-creator of the Zero Aggression Project, which started this show, which hosts this show, I should say. ZeroAggressionProject.org. We promote the show through there and host every episode through there. And the Zero Aggression Project is based upon the Zero Aggression Principle, which said that it's wrong. We should zero out, as it were, initiated force and excessive violence as means for achieving social goals, especially political ones. So, libertarian, there's a lot of different types, and this is one of the reasons I really wanted to have this conversation with you today, Bill, because this is going to be important on two levels today. That there are nuances in things. We can say a lot of things. We can make some declarations about certain types, and we can generalize. But within those generalizations exists a lot of different people with varied views, and there are a lot of different types of libertarians. The most typical libertarian is what's called a natural law libertarian.
Yeah, I get that.
Typically, they're constitutionalists. They believe in rights, that every human being is endowed with rights, and that those rights come with them as part of the package, whether they come from God or there's some other source that they come up with for that. But they believe that every human being has rights. It's a very American-sounding thing because it's very consistent with kind of the founding view of the country found in the Declaration of Independence. And they generally want a limited government, limited to what the Constitution says. So that's kind of general libertarianism, and that most libertarian-leaning people are in that general direction.
Yes.
There's a whole bunch of, nuanced types of, hyphenated libertarians. We've talked here on this show about human respect, which is an emerging philosophy that is focused on human flourishing. What does it take for a human to flourish. And it argues that humans do not flourish under coercion, that the way humans flourish is when they're able to work together voluntarily. So that's human respect, libertarianism, objectivists. An objectivist, that's the philosophy of Ayn Rand. You'll hear a lot of people associating libertarianism and Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand believed that you have life, you have certain needs to do or achieve certain things in life. She summed this up in the term selfishness. You had your own interests to pursue, and if you're unable to pursue your interests, if you're unable to be fully free, can't really have a free society either. That's called objectivist.
That's objectivist. That sounds radical. Then,
right now, the one that Javier Milei's had stuck to him, and that he has openly embraced, and that we should unpack a tiny bit, is anarcho-capitalist, which I think is the hyphenation of two of the worst ways to go about describing yourself politically to anyone.
Did he do that, or self-label, or was
this is a label that originates in America? It's really probably Murray Rothbard, the economist, who probably coined the term. But everybody who's in the anarcho-capitalist movement, he's kind of considered the patron saint or founding father of it. Murray died in the mid-90s. And but before then, he wrote prolifically on a lot of subjects, not just economics. And he laid out a system of libertarianism that is based on property rights. The core of it is property. So every question boils down to asking yourselves, who owns the property at the moment?
Property.
Right?
Is this a Milton Friedman branch of libertarianism?
No, that's Milton would be a different type of economics. There's Austrian versus Chicago. So this is Austrian economics that we're talking about here. In with the anarcho-capitalist, the Chicago school was much more mainstream. They're influenced not just by Murray Rothbard, but by guys like Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek.
Got it.
And all of these guys are guys that came up. They were words that were uttered by Milei while he was campaigning.
Yes.
And in the Rothbardian version of this, which is highly influential on another American character or politician, which is Ron Paul, in that version of libertarianism, they are very concerned about the control and rule by money, the ability to control what money is, what its value is, to favor certain parties over others in that valuation through schemes like central banks. They're anti-central banks. That's a highlight of their policy application of their views.
Got it.
And this is a big, big issue in Argentina right now that has an incredibly high inflation.
Because they've been printing money like crazy to cover their debts.
Yeah. Now, if you start to take libertarianism, I just want to say one more thing about libertarian. If you start to take libertarianism, I gave you all these basic philosophical views, but they all end up in kind of a very similar place. And that is that they want to downsize the government. I happen to have started an organization called Downsize DC, right?
There you go.
That meant that we wanted to see less regulation and more freedom. It meant that we wanted to see reducing of government spending dramatically. I used to argue when I was starting Downsize DC that if you took all the money that the government collects in cash and you piled it high like autumn leaves and then set them on fire, you'd still be better off than you would be if they spent it. The spending's the problem. So there's a tax and spend party in Washington. There's a borrow and spend party in Washington. The problem is the spending. And as you're going to see, that's going to become very important to Milei as well. But all of these views would support putting much more emphasis on natural competition, free people acting in the marketplace, able to exchange goods and services, able to compete with one another to deliver products and services and to address social needs.
Okay, so social needs, because that I think is at the core here of what's happening in Argentina.
Yep.
And just to be like the guy in the room with the hard question, and anarcho-capitalist suggests that capitalist approaches to social problems are preferred to government approaches to social problems.
Anarcho stands for anarchy. Anarchy, they mean it in the most classical sense. So they mean it, they have to fight to try to explain themselves. This is one of the reasons I think the term is so weak. but they have to try to explain that they're not bomb throwers, right? They're not radicals in that sense. They're radicals in the sense they believe that the more government you have, the more trouble you have. So in reverse, the less government you have, the less trouble you have. Like, we should get to anarchy, which is a state where everyone owns themselves and rules themselves and can negotiate their relationships with others.
So it's a more responsible version of, as you say, the classical form of anarchy.
Yeah,
so
anarchy is just no rulers, right? So if you have a oligarchy, that's your elite ruling. If you have a monarchy, that's a king or some kind of royal figure ruling. If you have democracy, that's the demos. That's everyone participating in a vote to rule. And they're saying, wait a minute, why do we have to have somebody ruling? Let's just have none. Yeah. So that's the approach that they're talking. Now, at capitalism, then, is the system, is the social system that they're advocating in place of it, which is where free exchange of goods occurs. And people have property. They own and exchange property.
And we depend upon people to do the right thing, or by not doing the right thing, to be eliminated from the equation by simply taking themselves out of it, by becoming impossible to work with.
They believe that the natural forces are more powerful in terms of governing, and that what government does is it tries to suspend some of these natural forces from being able to work in favor of an oligarchy or some other, elite frequently.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody who has their hands on the levers for everybody.
Yes.
Right.
So they believe that if naturally we would all maximize our freedom.
Okay. So in this picture, which, by the way, is the first time that I've heard libertarianism sort of addressed and encapsulated in under 5 minutes, so that it's understandable by the common dude or dudette. In this picture, where is Milei? How does he fit?
Well, so he clearly articulated the anarcho-capitalist economic approach. Yeah. He was very forthright about this, not just positively and negatively. And his negative speech is ugly, particularly even just by simple American standards. It's ugly. He said things that were very crass about his political opponents, used rude characterizations of them that sold very well. They were very attractive to a group of people who were supporting him. They picked up on this and loved the fact that he was taking it to him. So, for those whose delicate sensibilities have been offended by the likes of Donald Trump, you ain't seeing nothing compared to what he did down there. Now, it's a different culture and a different way of speaking.
True.
Another Central American politician that I watched talking, who happens to be female, who's running, is likely to be a candidate in her own country for president, was pointing out that she would not be able in a Latin American country to talk that way. There are different standards for how men and women can talk. This is how men talk. It's not how women talk. He engaged in what is normal political dialogue over there. He did not try to glamorize or pretend that he was something. So he was very blunt. And when I say he was blunt, I want to be clear, positive and negative. What do I mean? Positive in that he had a vision, like the one we just discussed. Yes. Negative in that he was very clear who was to blame for having put them in this situation in the first place. But to fully round out and answer your question about is he really libertarian, it's a coalition type of system. It's a parliamentary system. And in making that coalition, he decided to take a more right-leaning side in the culture war, because it tends that the people who understand free market economics better, on balance between the two camps of right and left, are the right. The right tends to do a better job with economics than the left does. And so he found allies over there, or people that were open and receptive to his message. And he found that he was able to tap some anger and sentiment on that side as well. It brings me to this point, and I want to say this out loud to everyone listening here, because we don't realize how good we've got it. And that is that culture war battles are a luxury. This is a country that has, their key issue is that inflation has it's been commonly above 100%. It's been as high as 140%. So I want you to imagine the following scenario, just to really get everybody in a sense of why a man like this would get the attention he got and why he won his election by a wide margin. He did so because It's not uncommon for a working class or poor family in Argentina. Poverty has gone staggeringly high. It went in the last decade from 5 to 40%. So we're talking about 40% of the population is in the boat that I'm about to describe right now. You get your check, and then you have to spend all of the money right away because the purchasing power of the money for the check you just cashed in just a few days will not be worth as much as it is now. And then to make matters worse, because of various reforms and proposals that have been put forth by the government to control inflation, one of the things that they did is they put a limit as to how much any one person can buy in the store. So this becomes an entire family outing. The paycheck arrives, the entire family gets to the store as quickly as possible. They break up the list so that they can all buy what's needed for their family for the week. And they've got to do it now because it will not be worth as much if they wait a few days. Now imagine that's your life here in America. Right. Imagine 40% of the population had to think that way, right? And this is what he's coming in to address. So there's people are saying, well, he has said some bad things on trans issues. Well, you know what? That all takes second place to eating, paying the rent. Okay. Regular people want to be empathetic, but they can't be empathetic when they've got that much economic pressure on them.
Yes, I see what you're saying now. It takes all the air out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And in 10 years, so 5%, what is this? I mean, this is a crazy question, but what is a sustainable level of poverty in a country?
You actually would want it to be lower than that, although it depends on how you're measuring the number. I mean,
right.
that's a factor as well. But based on their official estimates, that's what it is.
So that's economic, but can you imagine the social and behavioral health stresses on the system when 40% of the people are living in that kind of a place?
Yes. And so when someone comes along and speaks plainly, that person's and can explain, articulate who's to blame and why they did what they did, and then say, I've got a better solution. And they can spell that out too. And they can quote economists that have books that you can go read. By the way, all the works of Hayek, all the works of Mises, all the works of Rothbard are in Spanish. They're all available. So you're able to quote this material, you're able to put that out there and share it and say, this is what's happening. So, I'm sitting here. The reason I contacted you and said, we got to talk about this is I'm watching a show where they're talking about the Atlas Network, and it's spread into Latin America and Africa. The Atlas Network is a group of free market thinkers funded here mostly by Americans, but other people around the globe as well, who want to export the benefits of free markets to the world. And so they've helped build think tanks. And Javier Milei is a product of some of the work that's gone in Argentina there. And this was presented in breathless language, like this is some kind of like junta. They're overthrowing government. Right? They're
global cabal trying to take over.
They're conspiring. There's this big conspiracy or whatever. No, all they're trying to do is make sure that there are people who are putting out white papers who can make media appearances to talk about these ideas in public forums so that people can consider these ideas. And one of the spokespeople that emerged in this was Javier Milei. And Javier Milei then has to take it to a whole nother level himself. There's no American conspiracy that creates Javier Milei. Javier Milei is a guy who has the ability to communicate. He is the right guy at the right time to communicate that message. If you take away the economic situation there, Javier Milei isn't going to be that guy anymore. He's not the right guy anymore. Javier Milei is able to step in, and he was willing to take some risks, some social risks, to do what he did. But there's no American. I mean, just the breathless stupidity of this, that a think tank somehow or other articulates into trying to take over the government. No, I mean, it's a competition of values. And if your values have been dominant for a very long time, New York Times, Washington Post, random, person on the political left, your values have been dominant for most of the last 50 years. There's been slight breaks of slight right leans inside the Peronist party, which is called the See, I'm going to mess this up now. Justicialist party. And there's been some little right conservative leaning reforms that have been put in along the way. And those happened, by the way, to coincide with slightly better economies every time they did it. But they found ways to screw this up. And I think we should have a conversation of who they are and how they did get there.
So you said Peronist and Judicialist. Is that justice?
Yes, Justicialist. Yes,
Justicialist.
We'll explain where this word comes from. First off,
okay, so
let's talk about Peronism.
Yeah,
right?
Get back to Peron, because Eva Peron was a big deal and turned
the wife of the first wife of Juan Perón.
Right,
she dies in her 30s from cancer. Her husband was the president, and she became the vice president. Perón's second wife also is vice president of the country later, and she succeeds him and becomes president. She actually becomes the first woman president of the country. So Juan Perón is an authoritarian figure. His movement or his party was built on a cult of personality with him at the center. And throughout the time since, the people that are in the party appeal to him the same way that a Republican might appeal to Ronald Reagan, or a Democrat might appeal to FDR, and maybe even more slightly in breathless cultish tones. He starts in the 40s, and the main sources of his inspiration at the time, this is before the world was totally angered at fascism, was Benito Mussolini. Mussolini had a big influence on him. Then British laborism and the American New Deal. These were things that were all influential on him at the time.
So could you say he was a benevolent dictator?
No. He did not care for dissent. He and his wife did not care for dissent. And so I'm going to give you a tiny bit of an analogy here in a little bit as to who he is. Okay. But they did not. They responded very in rhetorically heavy-handed fashion to any type of dissent, and they did have some authoritarian tendencies when it came to even using law to punish their political opponents. His problem in going to Argentina was that bringing a socialism, which was considered an atheist philosophy, probably wasn't going to sell very well in a predominantly Catholic country.
Sure, yeah.
So that's where justicialism comes in. It is Christian socialism. So when you hear justicialism, think Christian socialism. It's the idea. It's a synthesis between Christian social theory or Catholic social theory with socialism. So what does this mean, though? By the way, that becomes the name of the party. The Justicialist Party becomes the name of the party. And so, but Peronism is an easier word to say, and it really is kind of the philosophy that underlies all this.
Same thing?
Yes.
Okay.
And so it is, how do I describe Peronism? It's actually really, really difficult. It's a little bit like nailing Jello to a wall. It kind of is what it needs to be when it needs to be that thing. Okay?
So it can change shapes around.
Yeah, it's very shape-shifted. It's very flexible, might be a nice way to put it, a gracious way to say it. Okay, flexible. But it's primarily a mix of populism and corporatism. So populism is usually trying to reach out to the people, right? And we're going to take care of you. We're going to make sure your lives are great. Okay, yay, our lives are going to be great because Perón is in charge, right?
Yeah.
But corporatism is where we reach out to the business community, and we tend to make industry great. So what ends up practically happening when you're trying to buy off both of these groups is that it's a buy off. It is literally like taking the public till and taking the force of the state and using it in whatever way you need between those two, almost like it's a slider. We're going to go a little bit more labor right now. We're going to go a little bit more corporate right now. We're going to do this thing. We're going to do this delicate dance, and everybody gets something out of it. Right?
Got it. Yeah.
So there's got, if you're playing that game, somebody's got to lose, and that's the taxpayers and the citizens. It's the devastation that starts to be wreaked in the economy from everybody being bought off by the government. But it also explains why people vote for it, right? They keep voting for it because they don't want their specific program or entitlement or benefit or contract taken away from them.
Makes perfect sense. Sure.
So this flexibility and this total control of the economy has allowed this system to stay in place. There was an interruption in Perón's leadership, but since the 70s, this has been the dominant view. And this started for this country all the way back in the 40s. So this is a long-held dominant political movement that Javier Milei is potentially breaking right now, that has been running the country for a very long time. Now, just to be clear how flexible they are, it's kind of like being in a one-party city or a one-party state where, one party's got the whole thing, sewn up lock, stock, and barrel, and they start developing competition within the party. There start to be wings of the party.
Sure.
Okay. So think, like in the think you could have like a conservative Democrat, you could have a liberal Republican, right?
Yeah.
But it's even more so, it's more pronounced there. They have wings. And so during times of economic contraction, when they got to start to get their house in order and more conservative elements take over, they bring a little bit more of traditional values. They say the reason that this has happened is we've lost sight of our traditional values. Sound familiar?
Yeah, I can hear that here.
And then on the flip side, most of the time, the Justicialist Party prefers to be progressive and spread its wings, and they have a more progressive social justice ethos that, of course, also is funded by the state. So it sums up into a form of national socialism.
Now, remind me, because I've forgotten. Every so often in my lifetime, you hear about Argentina is about to default on their debt. You remember hearing that?
Yes. Yes.
And
by the way, it's a typical theme for a lot of countries around the planet.
Okay, makes sense. Because you can't, print your way out of...
They cannot. The only country that can get away with that on the planet with impunity is the United States of America.
So far.
And that is because we have hegemony, which is a fancy way of saying we are the empire that dominates the globe, militarily speaking. And we also have the very biggest... We have the biggest economy. We have the place that everyone wants to come and trade. And so, there's a saying that when the United States economy gets a cold, the rest of the world gets a flu or pneumonia, right? It's really bad for the rest of the world. So the things that happen here, like we had a Great Depression, but it impacted the rest of the world much harder. Yeah. And that's the fertile ground in which, for example, comes up, right?
Yep.
You don't have that happen without the United States. So there are international agencies, particularly the IMF, that are out there to help facilitate loans to Argentina.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far off on this tangent because where it really hits home is considering here in America, which of our native politicians are most Peronist or most Justicialist.
Well, so this is an irony of ironies. This is incredibly ironic. The person that would probably be the closest to a Peronist in American politics today, the name that everyone would know and recognize, would be Donald J. Trump. And I say this not for very specific, clear reasons. I'm saying from a policy basis, trade restrictions, the idea that we should have a kind of a America first attitude, this nationalist streak. This is very much a hallmark. He is not a traditional free market economic thinker, which had been a dominant force in the Republican Party, even though I don't know that they were successful. It had been you at least had to pay lip service to it. He doesn't pay any lip service to it. And he slapped protectionist tariffs everywhere he could, and he put trade restrictions down in places that he could, and he wants to stop the free movement of goods and services and human beings across the border to try to rebuild the American economy. It's a protectionist approach saying we've got to put America first. And a Peronist would say we've got to put Argentina first.
So is Milei echoing Trump?
No, this is the thing that's really interesting, is because Trump has basically said, I am endorsing you. And this is because this is the way it's selling back home in the media. So I don't know if you remember, but hydroxychloroquine. The president uttered the word he didn't even know how to pronounce it. He said, we have this drug that people can, it's magic, it's HCQ. It's great. But hydroxychloroquine was as part of a package of materials, a package of pharmaceutical interventions, a cocktail as it's sometimes called, was effective. I've written about this. We've talked about this here on the show. Was effective at reducing, if it was taken early enough, incidents of hospitalization and death for people who had. So this got suppressed because Donald Trump said it. And now the other similarity is that this guy's kind of out there. He's got this real messy, bushy hair that he doesn't comb. It's like really goofy looking. He's got these long mutton sideburns to go with it. It's just kind of atrocious looking. And he talks much more crass than Trump. And so his style has been compared to Trump. And here's the thing that's really being compared to Trump is the fact that he's an outsider. Mm-hmm. He's not part of the official establishment. So they're bemoaning, for example, the potential death, we'll get to this in more detail in a moment, of the central bank system there, right? Why would the establishment in the United States care about the existence of a central bank in Argentina? Like, it's just kind of weird. And clearly this isn't working for them. They're very poor. And why the focus on some of his right-wing positions on social issues that he's taken, which are very much in the back in terms of what he's there to do and what he believes he's about.
Right.
Why the emphasis on those issues back here at home and the attempt to tie it to Trump? Well, Trump, of course, has taken full advantage of this and said, sure, he's like me, right? We're two peas in a pod. I can't wait to visit with him. I'm going to make a trip to Argentina because he's me. But policy-wise, Trump is no Hayekian. He's no Rothbardian. Not even close. Not even remotely close. Trump is much more like the people that Milei has fought, who would socialize things, who would do things to put Argentina first, which would mean that they would dramatically reduce opportunities for trade, increase regulation and taxes. Milei is actually proposing straight out just to get rid of a lot of that.
Oh yeah, you've seen the video of him ripping off the government agencies off the whiteboard and tossing them aside.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Get rid of them all. That sounds libertarian.
Yeah. So Milei's plan then is first off to cut spending and privatize a significant portion of the services that are provided by government. But some institutions he just flat out is saying the government doesn't need to be involved in. Just period. Okay. Downsizing the government.
Yeah.
Radically. And so, and that's important because the other thing and the thing that he's best known for in terms of policy proposals is what's called dollarization.
Right. This is so interesting to me. So he will dump his equivalent of the Federal Reserve in Argentina to hitch the star to the Federal Reserve, the unelected people who make monetary policy decisions that sit in America. This is his big plan.
So what a typical nation's central bank is really all about, and ours to a large degree too, is the ability to manipulate currency so that you can cover up other sins, economic sins you're committing.
Right. The inflation band-aid, we know.
Yeah. Deficit spending being the biggest one, right? We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Remember, we said they're going to buy off all these constituencies. We're going to do all these things. And then the way we're going to pay off the debt is we're going to inflate the currency.
Yeah.
And this has not really worked because debt, as part of the deal, the hegemonic deal we've got across the planet, is all dollarized. So these IMF loans that go to Argentina, they're dollar denominated. They got to be paid back in dollars. So if Argentine currency is losing ground, they print more of it. They walk into the bank before the exchange rate's been adjusted. They pay off some debt, and then it gets adjusted. Right? This is the game that they're playing, but it's played at the expense. This is a tax on the poorest, most fixed income type citizens.
Oh, sure. Poverty
in
from
the
5%
country
to 40%.
Because they can't buy anything.
Yeah.
Everything's gotten too expensive. And you can't even, it's impossible. Imagine 140% in inflation rate. You can't. So you're complaining. We Americans are complaining about the fact that, over the last 2 years, roughly, year and a half, we've seen prices on some goods go up by as much as 60%.
Sure.
There have been some goods that have, but in general, we're probably talking about more like a 10, 11% inflation rate. And I know that's going to get letters right now. People are going to write me and start telling me I'm all wrong about this, but we've been able to moderately adjust to this. This is hurt, but imagine that that's something you have to go through weekly, not every in a year and a half's time, weekly.
Yep. Weekly. Prices go up weekly.
It just, daily. I mean, it's absurd. So they took, he is saying the strongest currency in the world, the one that we have to denominate our debts in, is the dollar. We're going to go to the dollar. We are going to dollarize our economy. We're not going to have a central bank where they play these games with the people's money and they are able to diminish the value of your money. Now, how are we going to do that? Well, this is the hardest thing of all. And no politician, there's people that have walked around saying, I'm for reduced government. I'm for limited government. I'm for downsizing government. I run into people when we were downsized DC all these years to say, oh yeah, I'm all for that. No, you're not. They
I know you. You're going to have to explain that statement.
Every year they increase the spending, and everybody's got their favorite pet programs that cannot be cut. Nothing can be laid on the altar at all. And what ends up happening is that the two parties get together, and this is one of the reasons I hate bipartisanship, is they get together and they say, you know what? You're right. I don't want to take your stuff away. Just don't take my stuff away. Oh, we're agreed. We're going to buy both of our stuff. How are we going to do this? Oh, we're going to deficit spend. And how are we going to pay for that? We'll just print more money. And we've been fortunate because we're kind of like the nation that has outrun the other guy that's running away from the bear, right?
Right.
We didn't have to outrun the bear. We only had to outrun the other nations behind us, all of whom were borrowing and needing to convert their money back into dollars to stay on top of it. All of them have to buy oil that way as well. Yeah. So we're able to outrun this for now, but who knows for how much longer. There's been tremors, there's been earthquakes. We've experienced a couple of things along the way in the last 55, 60 years that should, be cause for concern. And seems to be building to a head potentially. This guy, though, right now is saying this is the strongest currency in the world. This is the way we have to pay our debt. We're going to have an honest accounting. We're just going to do this in dollars. And the only way we can do this is to cut spending. And we're going to cut some taxes too, so we can get the economy moving again. So that means we have to cut spending even more. We are really going to put this back in the hands of the people and allow them to dig themselves out. And this is a libertarian vision. Now, there's still a challenge because he's got there's an elaborate web of price and currency controls that were put in by these various Peronist administrations, and it's going to be very hard to pull these things back and not have an explosion of new price increases. It's very likely that those will happen in the short term. So he's got a lot to navigate here.
Sure,
but there's actually a bigger thing. There's actually a bigger thing that I'm concerned about here. Just on a experiential level, M. Stanton Evidence had this great quote. He said, as soon as one of ours gets in a position to do something, they cease to be one of ours.
How true.
And there is already, just in the days since he's been elected, we didn't do the show the night that he was elected. We're doing this a few days after. There is already initial evidence that he's starting to back off a tiny bit on the things that he said in his campaign. And I'll give you a tiny one. The gentleman that he had selected out, that everybody knew he was going to pick to head the central bank, whose primary job was going to be to close the central bank, did not accept the job when he was offered this week. And neither of them have commented as of the time that we're doing this broadcast. But the implication would be that he's not ready to move quite as fast as he talked about during the campaign. He's supposed to take office on December 10. And he might want to, calibrate and plan and maybe, go a little bit slower. That would be a big mistake. If you're going to do this radical surgery, you got to do it hard and all at once. And all the price of it's got to be paid right up front. And I got to say to everyone here in earshot, I'm speaking to you as a libertarian right now. Utopia is never one of the options. This is axiomatic. This is like gravity. A utopia is never one of the options. So I guarantee that if he does the right thing, there will be people whose oxes are gored and people who are upset with how some of the initial outcome or results that they're getting. I would compare it to drug recovery. The initial period of it is the worst. And if you just kind of, if you start to go through withdrawals and they get really bad, and then you know what, I'm just going to take a little bit of drugs to hold off the withdrawals symptoms. And then, okay. But then you're still going to have to go through that again. And you're going to end up delaying or prolonging a process and maybe never getting to the point where you get to recovery. It's got to just happen all at once. And it may have to be painful. It's in its initial stages.
Wow.
And
economic recovery is now the equivalent of substance abuse recovery. I think that's honest.
I think it's really hard for a politician to stick with substance abuse recovery in this case. I don't think they can do it. It's really hard. And I'll tell you what compounds. Well, let's compound this for a second. Because I've got some real concerns. I've got real concerns, and I want them all clear and on the record. Yeah. If I did this show for anything today, it's this moment now. Okay. The House, his party, only got 37 of 257 seats. In the Senate, his party only got 8 of 72 seats. What is his actual ability to govern? What level of cooperation is he going to get? How will he go about achieving consensus? Bill, if he's compelled, I was saying this for a couple of months before he was elected because I had friends that were getting excited. I'm like, this might be too soon. This might be premature for this movement. They might not have enough base to pull off their policy agenda here. This has to happen. It has to be thorough and complete. It's got to be, they've got to give it the full, what they call the full college try, right? Got to do the full. They're not, if they don't do it, because he has to make coalition deals. If he becomes the least bit concerned with staying in power, if they're able to depose him in some way, right, through whatever means and chicanery that politicians engage in. We're watching that happen here in our country too. When you see that happening, will he still be able to stick to his guns on this issue? Will he get sidetracked into other side issues? If he can stay on this issue, if he can get consensus and he can do everything that he's supposed to do quickly, then they have a chance. They have a chance, but it won't be instant. It won't be evident, and the opposition is going to be huge, and the whole world is going to report it as an absolute catastrophe. And it'll take it, but if it's given 2 to 5 years and allowed to flourish, then the people themselves will flourish. The turnaround will be miraculous. But the odds that happens, that a politician sticks to his guns on this, are so low that he gets support. And then every state has a deep state. There are people in the bureaucracy who are going to fight at every turn. They are going to not cooperate. They will use legal means. They will use passive aggressive means, and they will use outright strikes and defiance to keep from doing what they're supposed to do. And they will lie if that's what they have to do. They will find ways to charge him with things if that's what they have to do. All of this is a possibility. And the more he sticks to his guns, the more likely all of these things are to happen. And I just, with the odds of 37 on your side out of 257 or 8 out of 72, I can't help thinking right now that God tends to be on the side of the bigger battalions, right? How are you going to settle this? Now, maybe he can hold out and fight and get another election where he can improve the level of power that he's got. But Argentina's burning with 100 to 140% inflation rate, with a poverty rate that's topping out now at 40%. Do they really have the time to wait for that? And so those are my concerns. I really think the realistic possibility is that the odds of failure are high. And as a libertarian, I'm concerned.
Well, you can see this painting libertarians, black for the rest of eternity.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Yeah. This is the biggest thing that's happened in the entire history of the libertarian movement since it started. We've not elected a president before. There's people who pretended that certain people are this or that, or they're close to libertarian, or they're mostly libertarian or whatever. Nobody has actually come out and said, quoted Hayek and Rothbard and gotten elected to be president of the country and then proceeded to govern that way. Nobody's done those three things. Nobody's done that. And this guy's out there saying, I'm libertarian. And so when his libertarianism fails, when it doesn't turn things around because he gives up too soon, or he can't get the consensus necessary to govern, or the deep state fights him, when any one of those things or all of those things happen and he flips or he gets sidetracked into some other issue, it'll be libertarianism that gets blamed. They'll say, see, you elected a libertarian down there and it didn't work. So, and the hardest thing, our politicians at home can't do it. Our politicians in other countries can't do it because they're buying off people with the tax dollars. They can't cut the spending. The hardest thing to do here isn't the de-dollarization. The hardest thing to do here is to stop spending the money. Making those cuts is going to gore some oxes, and people are not just going to sit by and take that. That's the hardest part. If he doesn't downsize, it will not work.
Can he sell this? Is popular support one way
He's
forward?
going to have to. He's going to have to.
So far, he hasn't been honest, right? He hasn't told people what they're in for. You know, that recovery period.
I think he has in a way, because that's part of how crass he's been. He has suggested that his opponents are murderous, that they always get what they want, because at the end of the day, if they don't, they kill people, and that they're willing to destroy you economically. You're their enemy too, if you oppose them in any way. So I think there is some degree to which he's been honest, but he's got a tough road ahead of him. It is definitely going to require a lot of communication.
Anything that we can do here in the world's largest economy to help support this?
No, they have to do it for themselves. But I'm concerned that my American friends understand what actually happened here. And I want to be on record at the beginning of this administration to say that the only way you can call him libertarian is if it turns out he actually governs that way.
Yes. Yes. That's the point, right?
Yes.
Other concerns?
I think there's some grace points to raise before we sign off.
Okay.
First, I want to encourage people not to trust the regime media on this. Anybody that would come out with an oxymoron like, extreme right-wing libertarian and put that in a headline like they're serious, like they're educated, cannot be trusted. Propaganda and tribalism, neither one of these things are gracious. And so don't trust the regime media here. And second, given the point that I just spent a lot of time belaboring about being actually governing libertarian, I would be especially wary of the early reports coming out. See, I told you so. If he's actually implementing libertarian policies, there's a recovery period. There's a time during which the country is going to be going through some withdrawal from the socialist drug it's been on all this time. And I want you to watch how libertarian he actually turns out to be instead. I guess I am asking, usually I'm advocating for giving grace, but as someone who has been associated with the libertarian movement since the mid-90s professionally, been involved in the libertarian movement, worked on a libertarian presidential campaign as a paid staff person, as someone who's done those things. I'm not a Libertarian Party member at this point, but I tend to vote Libertarian, and I still have a lot of friends in the Libertarian Party. I'm asking that you wait. Just wait and see. That's the grace I'm asking for today. Wait and see.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't govern libertarian, then don't blame libertarianism. But if he does and he sticks to his gun and you wait, then I assure you it won't be utopia. That's never one of the options. But better days are ahead for Argentina.